Back on the ML Sports Platter, available online where books are sold and nearby bookstores. This book is absolutely on fire when you read it. It's so good. It's called Kingdom on Fire, Kareem-Wooden-Walton, and the Turbulent Days of the UCLA Basketball Dynasty. The author is Scott Howard Cooper. Here on the Platter, all brought to you by our good friends at Bowers & Company CPAs, Burn Dairy, and Stanley Law Offices. Scott, congratulations on the book. I really enjoyed it. Welcome to the ML Sports Platter.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'm excited to be here.
When do you think John Wooden realized this could be something special? Because he was always against, right? Hype, expectation. No, I'm good, Lou Alcindor. You don't have to come here, right? I mean, he kind of like went against the recruits, went against all that, and kind of wanted to do it a weird way, his own way, the methodical way, the fundamental way. But then he had to accept that it was going to happen. I know it's easy to say, well, the first time you see Alcindor play, but was there a moment you think where he actually said, it's not just now, this could be for a long time after he hadn't won really anything?
I think once he saw Lou Alcindor as a freshman, because they had won two in a row right before Lou, later Kareem, of course, right before Power Memorial senior Lou Alcindor decided to come to UCLA. And then he saw this freshman team, not only with Lou Alcindor, but with Lucius Allen and Len Shackelford and Kenny Heights. And I think at that point he said, all right, we've got something long-term here. I don't think he necessarily thought 7 in a row and 10 out of 12 long-term, but it was clear with that freshman group that was coming in that they had a chance for much more than a bit of success.
Let's say that the rosters are the exact same. The balance, the versatility, the depth, Wooden, guard play, they're elite across the board, and you have to win one game. You know where I'm going. Do you take Bill Walton at center, or do you take Lou Alcindor?
This, out of all the questions I sort of went over in the book, was the one I found hardest to answer.
We can stop the interview.
No. I want to give you I don't want to duck the question, but I'm afraid I may have to duck the question because they were both brilliant. I think, unfortunately, one of the things that happened with Bill Walton and his health history once he reached the NBA, not only were we deprived of seeing what could have been one of the all-time great professional centers, but I think because of that, and then because of all the years that have followed since in his retirement, a lot of people don't realize how good Bill Walton was in college. And I think they say, oh, yeah, All-American and, 21 and 22 shots against Memphis State in the championship game in St. Louis and all that stuff. But there is a case to be made that Bill Walton, not Lou Alcindor, was the greatest player in college basketball history and therefore the greatest center in UCLA history. This isn't what I'm saying. This is what my research shows. When I went back and looked at all the clips from the times, tried to find different, whatever YouTube could be found, but certainly the daily newspaper coverage at the time, there are a lot of coaches, players, even some NBA people who were saying at the time that Bill is better than Kareem. So your question is a tough one. There's no wrong answer. Maybe at the risk of ducking, I think that that's probably what I would come up with because they were both at a different level.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There is no wrong answer because they're not just elite in the annals of UCLA and college basketball history, but if you really start to split the hairs and people love the Mount Rushmore discussions. I'm one of them. And I think, when you separate a lot of the players, you got the one and done era, you've got this era, you have freshmen not allowed to play. You can compare generations all day long. I'm 44 years old, and you could say right now that the best, of the best are playing in multiple different sports. You could also make the argument that Jim Brown's still the greatest football player of all time. So you can do that until the cows come home. But with this particular argument, it is pretty unbelievable. When you start splitting hairs and you start putting people into that upper elite echelon, like GOAT territory in college basketball, those two guys could be on the Mount Rushmore. You know, I mean, you could take both of those guys and put Pete Maravich and Christian Laettner. You could take those two and put, you know, the next two guys on there. Impact 2-year versus 4-year versus one and done versus whatever. And you could go back and forth all day long. How were they different, though, and how were they similar?
Oh, that's a great one, because that's one of the fun conversations we get into in the book. They were very similar in that they were the epitome of team first, very unselfish, all about the W's, not about how many shots they got or points they scored, or certainly in the 2020 the 2024 conversation, it would be how much NIL money did they get,
yeah,
or anything like that. That was the most important similarity, because quite frankly, either of them could have blown this whole thing up. As you alluded to before, John Wooden did not want Lou Alcindor. He was worried that the entire world would have to revolve around this one player, and that's the exact opposite of what John Wooden preached. And Bill Walton obviously at times had a difference of opinion with John Wooden. It was never that they didn't get along. It's just they were much different personalities. But once Bill stepped between the lines, once Lou Alcindor stepped between the lines, all they cared about was winning and playing the John Wooden way. They went there in part because they wanted to play for John Wooden with his attitude and with the way the Bruins not only played, but the way they won. They wanted the whole team involved. They didn't want to dump it into the post and let Lou Alcindor go to work. Bill and later Kareem both alluded to the fact that it was this style of play, that it was team basketball, and that's what appealed to them. The differences are Bill was a better passer. Bill was a better defender. Kareem, Lou, we call him Lou because he didn't change his name till Kareem until after he left UCLA. He was a better scorer, but also Bill Walton had Jamal Wilkes, Keith Wilkes on his team, and that's a much better second weapon than Lou Alcindor had in his time. So Lou had to score more. So there definitely are contrasts, a little bit of the personality contrast as well. Bill was very smart, a real intelligent guy, but he led with his emotions. He was all about reacting. If he invested in something, he invested 100%. And that's whether it was basketball, that's whether it was protesting American involvement in Southeast Asia, and all of that came through. It was all about his emotions, and then he would think things through afterwards. Lou Alcindor was a thinker first. He weighed things. He thought them through before even some of the most basic decisions, and certainly the major ones. He was not a guy that was known to be a reactionary. He wouldn't let his emotions guide him. He always had that ability to sort of take a step back and think it through. It's an amazing time because not only did you have both of these guys within a short time on the calendar, just there were 2 years in between their varsity time. But that compare and contrast really is fascinating.
Yeah, it sure is. And the era was unbelievable. You just alluded to, you know, the rebelling and my gosh, I mean, Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Vietnam and race relations. I mean, everything that was going on. You know, you had the horrible events really across the country, across the globe. You had fighting, violence, and everything. And Walton had his part, and Lou Alcindor had his part for different reasons. But that time when UCLA just won and won and won and won, they rose above all that, you know, and there had to have been tension in the locker room, black, white, everybody in between, politics, social issues, but they rose above all of it. Could you make the argument that the analogy would be that that time was as difficult or more difficult than right now again, I don't mean to sound insensitive, because I want to be sensitive to the issues, obviously, that are more real life than social media. But we have a lot going on right now. We have NIL, transfer portal. We got ego. We got money. We've got social media that has just exploded. We've got a ton of channels. We've got celebrities walk 1 foot outside. Bang, there's a camera. Everybody's got a phone. The difficulty, I don't want to talk about the sensitive part, because clearly it was more sensitive time way back then than now. But difficulty being the word, equaling, winning. Is there analogy? Is there comparison?
I think there is a similarity in that there were a lot of things going on, but there are several big differences. Right now, not at this very moment, but in our recent history, we've had moments of America's military involvement overseas. But the 60s, the early 70s, that was the time that players were being taken off college campuses and sent to Vietnam. That's the time of the draft. Their friends were coming home in body bags. People would talk about going to a memorial in their hometown and seeing the name of a high school buddy that was their name was etched on stone or on a bronze plaque. And that's something you don't have now. And I think that that's something that one of the big reasons why it's so different. Yes, there was racial tensions then and now. There were overseas conflicts then and now. You have a lot of difficulties now. Exactly what you just mentioned. Things like the internet has put a entirely different level of pressure. You have things like 24/7 sports media that obviously did not exist then. Back then there was Sports Illustrated, and to an extent there was Sport Magazine and the Sporting News, and that was really it for national coverage. There was certainly local coverage. UCLA got a lot from the LA media, but it's nothing compared to what it is now, and that makes the modern day much more difficult. Back then, it was pretty typical for even the superstars to stay 4 years in college, 3 on varsity and 1 when the freshman team, until freshmen were eligible. So the circumstances were different. I see what you're saying, that there's always been issues to contend with, and that there's tension in American society now and then, even beyond basketball and college campuses. But that's one of the things that really made me want to do this book, was not just a typical sports book, but wanting to set it against the backdrop of the times, to talk about how UCLA, its coach, several of its players were directly connected to America coming unhinged in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, no doubt. And I love this stuff too. And the book, again, is called Kingdom on Fire. We're talking Kareem-Wooden-Walton and the turbulent days of the UCLA basketball dynasty. And it's all over major bookstores and online where books are sold. You got to go grab it and give it a read. By the way, it's March, so a good time to read about college basketball. And the author is here on the MLSP, Scott Howard Cooper. I just love this stuff. And it is just a wild thing to think about, because the general fan just jumps at, well, it's a dynasty, they won, it's sports, let's talk the sports part. And it's like, nah, I mean, there's a lot of that stuff, the time you do it, the era you do it. And so it brings me to more of the sports part now that we're off of that. UCLA is still considered by many to be the greatest college program of all time. But since this time, there's been the occasional splash, the Final Four stuff, Ben Howland, 95, right? The O'Bannon brothers. But they haven't had the sustainability like Kentucky, Duke, Carolina. We've had the one and done. We've had different times and eras. We've had now NIL transfer portal, all sorts of things since this dominant era. So I ask you this. When you take everything into consideration, players, coaches, Sweet 16s, Elite Eights, conference championships, tournament regular season, blah, 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 NBA players, whatever the criteria may be to rank programs of all time, where is UCLA right now?
UCLA right now, or the entire history of the program?
The history of college basketball. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying, like, where are they right now? If you had to say right now, where are they in history? Are they still one? Are they behind Carolina, Duke because of the last 3 decades, 4? Where are they? Are they still number one? Because this dynasty was so dominant, that you could look at it and go, you're good. It lasts 100 years.
Well, that's the thing. When you look at the last 45 or 50 years, certainly UCLA is farther down the list. Let's be realistic, and I think people are able to look at the true monument programs of the last several decades and say UCLA clearly is not among them. They've had their moments. They're still at a certain level of prominence. It's a bad 23, 24, but they've also had some decent tournament runs in recent years. I don't know how you top 10 and 12 years and 7 in a row and 1A and 1B for the greatest player in college basketball history and arguably the best coach. If UCLA is not at number one, and I understand, Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, a lot of the people will want to make that claim, and they all have legitimate arguments. Look at some of the people that have coached at Kansas and Carolina and the programs that we've mentioned. But you're talking when it's impossible to put together a starting five at a university, you've got something pretty special.
Yeah.
And you even get down to who do you leave off your second five? What there are Hall of Famers that may not make UCLA's top 10. That's a pretty good thing to be able to say, right?
Yeah, no doubt about that. A couple quickies I'll let you run. Sam Gilbert. Why is Sam Gilbert not talked about more through the years in college hoops history? And did UCLA cheat?
Well, the answer to the second one is yes. I don't know if you could say UCLA. UCLA didn't cheat, but UCLA went along with the cheating. I don't know if I'm getting into some semantics too much. UCLA players cheated. Sam Gilbert cheated. John Wooden, no. Athletic director J.D. Morgan, no. But also, they knew about it. They clearly had to know about it. Even the players said so, and they did nothing to stop it. So they went along with it. Why is Sam Gilbert not talked about much? I can tell you he's talked about quite a bit in anytime UCLA specifically comes up when they're talking about the history and the dynasty years, certainly in Los Angeles. A lot of it around the country, I think, it's been lost to time. That it's been 50 years now since the end of the dynasty. We're in the same month 50 years ago that the 7 years in a row, the winning streak of championships came to an end with a double overtime loss against North Carolina State in Greensboro at the Final Four. So that's a lot of years. That's a lot of new generations of fans. At the same time, I know when I first announced on social media I was doing this book, a bunch of people hit me up and said, "You're going to do Sam Gilbert," right? So
Okay.
he may be gone, but he's not completely forgotten. Maybe partially forgotten because it's been a lot of years, but not completely.
So I'm a St. Bonaventure grad, and that 1970, that Final Four year there where Lanier gets hurt, and Chris Ford runs into his knee, and Bonnie's might have won the whole thing. That was one of the years they didn't have Walton or Alcindor. That's Steve Patterson, UCLA, and I like a lot of the tie-ins to the old Bonner stuff because I think people, forget now is like, well, they're just a small mid-major and Olean and this and that, and I try to tell people, well, they have a Final Four banner, would have been a national title banner. And they have an NIT championship banner. Oh, the NIT. No. The NIT was a big deal in the 60s and 70s. It was the NCAA then that you see on the NCAA tournament, now on television. I try to tell some people who are younger or basketball fans my age, I try to educate them on the NIT. So I appreciate everybody who loops in my Bonnies into this kind of time period with Bob Lanier and those great teams. That's awesome stuff.
I was just going to say, hopefully one of the things I get into that I give people a sense of some of the prominent schools of the time that we obviously don't spend a lot of time when we say great teams in college basketball in the 2020s don't come up with St. Bonaventure, Jacksonville. Drake was in a Final Four. I mentioned Jacksonville with the great artist Gilmore. Cal State Long Beach.
Sure.
Back then, they were a serious challenger to UCLA, not as a national champion, but they came close to beating the Bruins in a tournament. They were a big threat with Jerry Tarkanian in Los Angeles, and so that's one of the fun things about it, is to be able to say, oh yeah, Drake was in a Final Four, and there are a lot of different the St. Bonaventure you mentioned, and there's a lot of those moments, and that's kind of one of the fun things.
No doubt. I held you a couple minutes over. I just one more minute here. Just give my listeners and viewers, when they get done reading this book, what do you hope they say about it in the final minute?
Well, that's a good question. I hope they say that the energy of the author really came through. I loved doing this. I had been wanting to do it for such a long time that when I finally signed that contract, it was like head down and straight ahead. And I was so excited to do it. And it was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. So I hope that that comes through. And I hope that people say, you know what, that for a program and for several of the big names that have been in the spotlight for all these decades, there were some news. There was a fair amount of new stuff in there, new anecdote story. There's no big breaking news. It's not like there's any oh my gosh moment, but I know that there are several moments in there that people have not read before. So I hope that they come away with something new, and they come away feeling as excited to read it as I did to write it.
Check for this guy. I'll tell you that right now. This book was absolutely tremendous, and March is here. That means it's all the madness and the time to read all your college basketball right here. The history is amazing. Kareem-Wooden-Walton, the whole thing, the turbulent days of the UCLA basketball dynasty. The book is called Kingdom on Fire, online where books are sold, and your nearby bookstores like Barnes & Noble. The author is Scott Howard Cooper. Scott, this was unbelievable. I appreciate the time. Congratulations on the work. And you have a special place in my heart as well, because your last name includes my dog's first name, Cooper. So, you know, when I look down, I see every time I see Cooper. In fact, he's getting his hair cut right now. I told you that we were texting. So that's some pretty cool stuff too. Whenever I see Cooper in somebody's name. But in all seriousness, this book was awesome. Congratulations, and I cannot wait to see what you have in store next for us. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you for the great conversation.